The Cloudcast is sponsored by Intel Cloud for All, driving the creation of tens of thousands of clouds.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to another episode of the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Brian, we have to be shattering all records at this point of consecutive podcasts together.
I know. I think we're up to about a month or so now, which is good. We haven't now. The flip side of that is we haven't seen each other in about 6-8 weeks. But
right. Together, so conference season is almost upon us. What do you got coming up this year?
We'll be out in San Francisco next week doing the Google event, and then I've got OzCon. Maybe doing OzCon. Definitely doing OpenStack Summit in Austin. So. Getting my fill of barbecue, and then we'll see what happens in May and June and stuff. Definitely going to DockerCon and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Are you? What's the one you're track chair on?
In Interop. I'm the track chair for Interop, but I don't know that I'm going to be able to get over to Interop because it's the same week as EMC World. But I'll be out in Vegas. I'll be running back and forth from the hotels in Vegas. So hitting all the shows this year. It'll be fun. How about you?
Cool. Probably gonna hit OzCon. Might hit Cloud Foundry Summit. I would definitely want to hit MesosCon. MesosCon is out in Denver, so that one's going to be really easy for me to get to with the office out there. Probably not going to do DockerCon just because of some family conflicts, and we'll see where everything goes from there. I don't know. We'll see how the year goes.
Good. I'll wave the flag at DockerCon for all the things. We will, and for everybody who kind of follows along, we always do stuff with the O'Reilly people. We will have some free passes to give away for OzCon. We will have some discount codes for OzCon. Give us about a week, and we'll put some stuff together for anybody who wants to go to OzCon, and then we'll do some stuff for Velocity as well. So,
yep. And real quick mention of that too. The promo code that's on the website expired. We are getting another one out. We were hoping to have it by today, but we should have it within the next day or two. Probably by the time this publishes, we'll have the updated promo code. We'll put it in the show notes and update it on the website.
Yeah, cool. Well, why don't we get started? We got tonight's going to be interesting. We're talking about Microsoft. We're talking about Microsoft using Skype, so a Microsoft product. And second time we've talked to Microsoft. You weren't on the last time. It was fun. It was unexpected. We used to always say we never could have Microsoft on the show for whatever reason, and now twice in about 6 months. So it's going to be fun tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. So tonight we have Corey Sanders, Director of Program Management at Microsoft, and Ryan O'Hara, Director of Private Cloud Solutions at Microsoft. How are you guys doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Doing excellent, yeah.
And I don't know about not getting your fill at Microsoft. We'll make sure we're a constant presence here.
We're willing to join as many times as you want us to join. So
there you go.
Just let us know. We'll be back. And now if we don't get invited, we'll know we did a terrible job. But I guess you can invite just me as well. So.
Corey has a lot of words to share.
Well, that's okay. Well, and so what's interesting about this is what we really wanted to do was talk about Azure Stack. Because we've been following Azure in one way or another for quite a while, and then we've been following the announcement of Azure Stack, and that's why we wanted to talk to you tonight is really just kind of figure out how this came about and kind of where this space is potentially going. But before we do that, if you don't mind, just tell us, you've both been at Microsoft for good amount of time now. Give us a little bit about your backgrounds briefly and some insight into kind of all the changes that seem to be going on at Redmond these days.
Yeah, definitely. So why don't I kick it off? This is Corey talking. I've been with Microsoft for about 12 years now, and so I actually started as a developer in Windows, and I was actually fixing bugs in the core parts of the Windows platform, which is kind of interesting given some of the areas that I work on now, which I'll get to, and did that for about 5 years, and then moved into the Azure space, and I've been there now for about 6-7 years. Did that add up to 12? I think so. And so I've been working there and have been responsible for some of the compute platforms in the team. And what's been actually really interesting as I've spent my time in Azure, in sort of the public Azure side, talking with customers over the last few years and continue to sort of expand the platform and grow. we've sort of started building out a lot of different perspectives about sort of the goals of the platform, what customers want to do on the platform. The first one really being sort of what we kind of draw Venn diagrams to show this, or sort of a triangle, sort of thinking about the intersection of hyperscale, enterprise grade, and hybrid being sort of a really important aspect as people approach the cloud. And obviously, the main part of today's show will talk about the hybrid aspect and really focus in on that being a really critical aspect for people deploying. But the other two, obviously, hyperscale, the 30 regions that we've announced, 2 trillion events coming into our IoT system every month. Just the growth that we've seen of the platform has been incredibly exciting. And then the enterprise grade, being able to support really enterprise quality identity and support enterprise solutions, both Windows and Linux. Our recent Red Hat announcement, sort of a good example of some of that enterprise grade being brought into the Linux side. The other aspect of the work that I've done that's been very sort of changing for me over the last few years has been a lot of the Linux work. So half of my team actually works on the Linux part of the platform and the open source part of the platform, and the other half works sort of on the Windows part of the platform. I keep those teams separate from each other. I don't let them talk to each other. No, just kidding. What we end up doing is it's really been amazing to sort of see the growth and the excitement for Linux-based solutions, workloads, and OS. 1 in 4 VMs now running in the platform are running Linux, and just the customer deployments, whether it be data stacks, whether it be Cloudera, whether it be Cloud Foundry or Pivotal Cloud Foundry, just the full range of these workloads that are deploying have been really exciting to be a part of. Again, given my starting of my career solely on Windows, it's been so much fun to be working on a Mac and working in those parts of that Linux space and open source space. And so that's an incredibly long-winded introduction to myself and what I work on. So if that's any testament to the rest of this show, you're going to be bored of me by the time it's done. So maybe I'll hand it over to Ryan.
I think we are done. I think we covered everything. He told you all about Microsoft. This is Ryan. I started at Microsoft back in '97. My focus at that time was around developer tools, and then graduated from there into enterprise infrastructure, areas of messaging, security, and then enterprise operating systems and management. You asked an interesting question, like what sort of changed. I'd say at the macro level, we've gone from a focus of delivering our products and sort of evangelizing what our products are capable of doing. And today, I would say more and more our culture is about listening to customers and figuring out what our customers are trying to do, and then making our products sort of enable or conform to their needs. And so, you can kind of translate this simply to a culture of experts, to a culture of sort of seekers or a culture of journeys. It's really interesting where, I would say more and more or less and less, you see employees inside of Microsoft saying, I know what the answer is or what the customer state ought to be. And instead it's sort of, let's go grab a bunch of customers, figure out what business problems they're trying to solve, and then let's go build the best technology that they can depend on. That mentality is, I think, a dramatic shift over the last 10, 15 years. And, I think, we're seeing that driven at the top of the company with folks like Satya. And then I think now in the rank and file, where there's, more and more empowerment every day to go and kind of listen to the customer voice.
Yeah. No, it's definitely interesting. I mean, every couple of days, something gets announced and people literally go like, are we sure this is happening? I mean, we're seeing, SQL on Linux. We're seeing, it's kind of, it's definitely, it's great to see. I think people are really excited about it. I was out with a bunch of people a couple of weeks ago in San Francisco, and, unanimously people were like, I think Microsoft's turned the corner. I think they're, like you said, they're listening to people. They're open to different ideas. We're seeing things get open sourced. I mean, we're joking about it a little bit, but I mean, you've been around since '97. I mean, these things are really, really big, different ideas coming out of Redmond, which is exciting. And given how big,
you have guys like Corey Sanders on Cloudcast, and then you've got SQL on Linux, and
end of days.
Those are No, but I mean, in the past, the way we would talk about these things was, we get the questions, when will Microsoft embrace XYZ, either open source component or Linux, et cetera, and we would often respond with, when it makes business sense, when the business case makes sense. I think now the answer is simply when the customer case makes sense, and what you're seeing behind all these decisions is really that customer-driven mentality I was talking about, which says, SQL on Linux, well, if that's what customers need to solve the problem, well, let's go there and do our best for them.
Oh, that's great. And I'll kind of ask you to kind of move over into the Azure Stack side now. Give us the basics of Azure Stack, and how does it differ from, say, previous Windows Server or other cloud platform offerings? And then I'm going to also kind of along those customer driven questions. One of the big questions we always ask a lot of the startups here is okay, what problem are you solving, right? And so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I think in short answer to your question is, Azure Stack is a projection of Azure that is instantiated in the customer's data center, the service provider's data center. And when we start there, that is a very significant step forward, I think, for Microsoft, but also for our industry. What I mean by that is traditionally, we like to look at things that land in the customer data center, and we like to call them private infrastructure or private clouds. And so there's a rush to go and compare Azure Stack to an OpenStack or a VMware-based private cloud or what have you. I think the reality is that I don't think of Azure Stack as a private cloud. I think of it as a companion or an extension to our Azure service. And when you start to think about it in that way, then you sort of say, well, wait a second, what's the Azure service represent? And as I've been having this conversation with customers more and more, the discussion is Azure to Microsoft is platform and not place. Meaning it's the platform of services that are going to power modern applications for customers moving forward. It's not a place where we just host a bunch of VMs and where sort of arbitrary things happen. And so if you think about it in the platform context, then you start to say, okay, well, if I want to invest in this platform, wouldn't I want a platform to be globally available wherever I need to make great things happen? Wouldn't I want the broadest availability and the richest set of services for my developers, whether they are targeting something in Microsoft's data centers or in the private data centers. And so once you kind of make that step, then you say, oh, okay, I get it. Azure then is the only hyperscale modern cloud platform that not only offers a self-hosted or a globally hosted environment, but also rolls that platform out in the hands of customers, and that's the role Azure Stack plays.
Yeah, and I think from my conversations with customers on sort of the public Azure side, I think there's just so many that are hungry for the agility, the time to market, the time to value that the cloud is offering. I mean, it's a real tangible value that people are finding in the cloud. It's really changing the way a lot of businesses are interacting and building solutions, and that's across pretty much all facets of business, from retail to oil and gas to healthcare. And but across a lot of those facets, across a lot of those verticals, there's those difficulties sometimes about the public cloud aspects around proximity to your customers or compliance expectations or governance and so on. And so there's that hunger there, but then there's that additional desire or that additional value that's not being met. And I think that's where sort of that extension into the private cloud becomes really, really valuable.
Yeah. So I'll say right now, one of the most important applications going on in my life right now, which is my bracket, which is over on ESPN, I noted today, was running on So kudos for that. That's business critical for many of us these days.
So Brian, was your bracket busted tonight though?
Partially busted, but I won't blame it on these guys. I'll blame it on the Big Ten. So let's break this down a little bit. So we've heard for a long time lots of companies who for the right term or the wrong term have sort of said, hey, I like what's in the public cloud, but I need it in my own data center for, like you said, multiple reasons: proximity, security, compliance, whatever the thing was. Azure, and the public clouds don't necessarily give away a lot about their architecture, but the bits that we know about Azure, it's sort of deployed in racks, in terms of like, it's racks at a time. There's pods, there's nodes. How do you equate that? What is a customer of any reasonable size? What do they do when they get the Azure Stack? How much gear do they have to have? What do they have to do to set it up? I mean, how close does it mirror what's in Azure, and how much can they, is there any using of the existing equipment they might have in place, like networking and SAN, or is it just racks of equipment to mirror sort of what's in Azure public cloud?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is Ryan. I'll take a stab at addressing that one. I mean, I think from the first of all, your question kind of highlights or gives us the opportunity to highlight like what's sort of the engineering challenge in bringing Azure Stack into the customer's hands. Yep. And our approach, one of the things, the principles guiding our approach is creating a tenant-facing platform of rich services, infrastructure and platform services that are consistent with what you see in the public cloud. That promise of consistency is so critical, right? There are so many private instantiations of services, IaaS or PaaS, that are frankly, not the public cloud. We've really strived to avoid being, another thing that represents an otherness. Instead, we're trying to represent, Azure very directly. And the way you do that is you do not ape the public cloud. You do not sort of say, hey, there's the S3 API, and we're just going to go and ape that and bring that on premises. What you do is, we've taken the approach of sharing code of the platform services with the public cloud, and bring those services and make them deployable in the enterprise. So first and foremost, it starts with a significant amount of resource sharing for the things that customers will ultimately consume. The next challenge, though, is we have to make those things deployable at a scale that's reasonable to the enterprise and operable by the admins who power the enterprise. And that's an additional set of challenges then that we need to take on, in particular on my team. If you think about the way we, provision services in the Azure data center and deploy the underlying infrastructure, we make assumptions about absolutely massive amounts of capacity that are typically in place. Azure deploys, scale units that are 30 racks of infrastructure at a time. When you have 30 racks of infrastructure, you make different assumptions about qualities of service and capacity planning, et cetera. And so we've designed Azure Stack to be operable in an enterprise running on, a minimum environment of sort of 4 nodes, 4 physical servers, and then growing beyond that. And then for customers that want to sort of build out multiple environments of these, these clustered environments, they'll build out, an infrastructure of multiple clusters, starting at 4 nodes and scaling beyond that. And then they will layer on multiple regions made up of those multiple clusters. And so, a given enterprise might have then, a multi-region topology powered by multiple clusters, giving them some high availability concepts of the infrastructure. And as they do that, all that has to be monitored, all that needs to be patched, all that needs to be orchestrated by the administrators. And so, one of the things that we do is we try to tackle the complexity of the lifecycle operations with basically a purpose-built management framework that will not only simplify the provisioning of an Azure Stack environment, but also the orchestration of updates as the admins operate this across the lifecycle, an optimized set of alerts and monitors for health services as well. And so, very much so trying to think about how do we take the existing skill sets of the enterprise and let them participate in this journey to provide cloud services. Now, you asked, hey, can I just repurpose a bunch of my environment and roll it out? In short, I'd say no, right? In short, most of the customers that are going to go down this path of building out a cloud environment, they're going to provision generally new hardware, right? This is going to be a project that is backed by a budget with a reasonable team that is scoped to address the challenges. I think getting into a cloud project in the enterprise requires that kind of critical thinking and upfront planning, and is not simply go harvest a bunch of brownfield resources and try to repurpose them into something that becomes a mission critical service.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. It's like you said, you sort of have to get people a little bit into the mindset to say, hey, we're not going to sort of do this sort of halfway. You have to. The environment's got to be right. The operations have to be right. The software's got to be right. So, I mean, that all makes sense.
Yeah. And the thing that I'd say is there's no magic here, right? We're still talking about provisioning, clusters of multiple machines, right? There's still firmware that will need to be updated. There are still patches that will need to be applied. Yep. We can simplify these things and we can make more optimal ways of working through these tasks, but these tasks exist. And so one of the things that I find myself talking to customers about quite often is, do you want to re-up for that journey? It's time now to really, write out the list of pros and cons and say, for what portion of my estate can I go and push the boundaries and bring my company to the public cloud and take that dependency? And for what set of items can I not? And what are the reasons that are actually blocking me from sort of going all in? And the reason we usually have that discussion is, I sort of say that list is going to be very valuable because, down the road, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months from now, when you're through the implementation and you're updating all of these servers and, you're running through issues that are critical to that environment, which there will be those things. You want to pull out that list and remind yourself, why are you continuing to make investments on premises? And for the reasons that Corey talked about, some customers that have been planful, appropriately thoughtful about that decision are going to be able to answer that and say, yes, we had to because of critical regulations. We had to because of data sovereignty. We had to because of data gravity. And then I think the customers that say, I don't know why I'm in this state are going to scratch their heads and say, you know what, we have a decision-making compass that has failed us, and we have to step back and reassess.
Yep. That's fantastic. Let me ask you this, though, along those lines. So now that you're kind of still in preview, based off of the customer feedback you've seen so far, what did you expect and were the use cases that you're primarily using for these? And then probably more importantly, at times that we tend to ask this question a lot, what didn't you expect? Any kind of things that you didn't see coming that came out of the customer feedback?
Yeah, good question. I think there's a couple things that are interesting. One is our first preview was really to get to address the scale question definitively. Could we stand up an environment that was at a minimum scale? It doesn't have high availability, but it's our min scale is a one server proof of concept environment. And so check, we got to this place where we were able to sort of shrink the universe into that level of scale. Now, I think what's been interesting along that journey is, we thought that our preview customers would look at Azure Stack and Azure and say, maybe I'll do dev test in one location and I'll do production in another. They'll think about sort of a use case that is for the public and a use case for the private. I would say the thing that is, surprises the most is how aggressive customers are thinking about the hybrid use cases, and not sort of an A versus B mentality, but an A plus B. And that really gets into scenarios like, you were talking about your bracket earlier. Instead of saying I have a new application and I want to do one thing in private and one thing in public, it's instead saying I have a end-to-end experience and I want to leverage some on-premises assets in combination with some public cloud assets. And often this gives rise to portfolio or application modernization scenarios where, hey, I want to globally project a consumer experience that is going to be optimized for, smartphones connecting to a service represented, and served up through Azure, whether it's the media services, the CDN services, what have you. But I want to connect to, line of business applications or data stores that, my company has built up over multiple years. And I actually want to, envision building one service that actually connects those two elements. And I want to do all of that on the Azure platform. That's, I'd say, the discussion that is sort of surprises how ready customers are. In particular, application developers are to go push the hybrid, the boundaries of hybrid thinking now that we're offering this consistent platform that stretches across the two. I would also say that I'm shocked that some of these guys have deployed one server and now can claim that they've got Azure running in their garage or wherever else they have it. I think that's those are the funniest.
I wish I could do that.
Yeah. It's like, wow.
Make things simpler.
Yeah.
They all want to get on the commercial like the Weather Channel or something like that.
That's right.
So, we've been kind of following this space for a long time. You guys have obviously been building stuff for a long time. You hear all the time, especially in the on-prem space. Trying to build and run a cloud is hard. You guys are going to give them the software elements of this, which is huge. Like you said, you're sort of sharing code between the server team and the cloud team. Yep. How much further does Microsoft then go with that? Obviously, you talked about you're gonna push and be able to update features and update security patches and those sort of things. Is there an operational element? Does the Azure team sort of run something for customers as if it is a remote region or something like that, or is it still, do customers kind of operationalize it themselves?
Well, yeah, I would say, first of all, we have a service that Microsoft operationalizes on behalf of the customers. That's Azure, and customers are more than those doors are open, and I encourage customers and your listeners to go out and get subscriptions there today. But sort of joking aside, you're really, I think, bringing us back to some of the things that I talked about earlier, which is how, to what extent are you listening to the customer challenges and solving the customer problems? And so first and foremost, I would say, I do think about Azure Stack very much as being, in some ways, an enterprise region of Azure. You have, in the public cloud, a US East or, a US West sort of region that you can consume from. And then in some cases, you will have the Contoso, enterprise region that you will also consume from. And so I think that's sort of a reality. Now, as we work to achieve that with customers, I think we are extending into a broader chunk of the problem than just delivering software. But I would say where we're optimizing our efforts right now is working with the hardware ecosystem that is going to ultimately deliver these solutions in conjunction with the software that we provide. Rather than, as you were suggesting, reaching in and providing the remote operations from our NOC or our service operations center. And so the work that we do with our hardware ecosystem is really to jointly engineer systems that work as optimized hosts for the software. And work together on sort of, the best configurations, the best layout, the best configurations, best ways to monitor, software and hardware. Gotcha. And I think this is a fairly important one, because if you look at where customers run into, sort of gnarly problems, thorny problems in the build out of their cloud projects, it tends to be just bringing up the environments and getting to a first known good state before they ever get to the long-term operations of things.
Yeah, makes sense. Final question. We're kind of hitting some of our time limits here. What are your thoughts on, Azure Cloud has a very large set of services, and how should customers really think about Azure Stack and pulling those services down? Is it a subset of services? Is it full services? Tell us a little bit about maybe some of the nuances or differences between Azure Cloud and Azure Stack.
Yeah, sure. So, I'd say, again, this comes back to let's meet the customers where they need us to be. And, today, Azure's got a really broad offering of services, infrastructure, and platform services. It also has a robust management and automation layer. We've talked about the Azure Resource Manager, et cetera, and different consumption interfaces, be it dev tools, APIs, PowerShell, what have you. The work that we're doing in Azure Stack basically says, let's get the core, infrastructure services as you would probably expect. Let's get the compute service. Let's get the network service. So we've got gateways and, we've got load balancers and VNets. And then let's also bring in storage and here let's think about structured storage like blobs and tables and queues. So we got that foundation under us. Then as we establish that, of course, we wrap that with, the portals and the APIs and all the management interfaces that are there in the public cloud. We've brought those on premises. And then finally, we say, then what platform services should we bring? How do we think about these higher level services? And I kind of think about it in two camps, honestly. One is there are a set of Azure services that probably don't make sense for us ever to bring on-prem. And what kind of guides my thinking there is, there's a set of services that make economic sense. They're feasible only because they are shared by multiple tenants, right? There's a large build out of a compute farm that multiple tenants can ultimately, amortize. We can amortize that cost and complexity over multiple tenants, and we can provide something that makes a lot of sense. But if we were to burden any one enterprise with standing up, a large indexing farm or, a large identity graph infrastructure, then becomes an operator's burden where customers say, no, thank you. I'd rather consume that from the public cloud in a shared way. Once we kind of take those off the table, then it really becomes a question of, all right, where are customers taking bets to modernize their application portfolio? And there, I think, you would anticipate the list of requirements I've got on my team almost based on some of the conferences that you were talking about earlier, right? I mean, you guys are talking about going to DockerCon, right? Like the importance of things like, containers, right? The importance of a PaaS service, be it a Microsoft PaaS or the ability to make, the open source platform frameworks just, sing on our service. This is work that, we're absolutely engaged in to bring those services.
Yeah, and I think one of the things when we approach this in Azure, very customer driven and sort of looking at that whole stack and when we start at the infrastructure layer for things like very deep support for Cloud Foundry and so on, that will obviously move down as sort of that higher level service that you could then enable. But then even some of our managed services, recently announced the container service that sits on a set of infrastructure but can then deploy Apache Mesos or deploy Docker Swarm. Those technologies, those solutions will all go down as well because they make a lot of sense to be able to take sort of that original point that I made, the desire for customers the hunger to get that new agility, that new application model, that modern app story. It really does transcend the hybrid cloud. And so making sure that we enable it either via infrastructure with the Linux-based or open source solution sitting on top of it, or with our managed services that in many cases are now actually depending upon Linux, depending on open source to be able to offer the product to customers. And I think a combination of those types of solutions are really going to drive both the public cloud. It's already driving the public cloud, and then in the future we'll continue to drive the Azure Stack story as well.
And one of the things that I would say is this is going to be an interesting product to deliver because it's in some ways it's very different than previous infrastructure products where we think about one big bang in terms of a general availability, and then we retreat and go back and plan and work on the next thing for 2 years and then re-release. In the case of Azure Stack, we will see a continuous stream of updates where we can continue to not only rev the services so they keep in concert with Azure within a reasonable cadence, but also the ability to introduce previews and ultimately generally available services from Azure that are incremental to what we might start off with when we initially launched the product. So I think that's going to be part of being in the cloud cadence. And again, one of those things that is going to be important that we make that attainable, simplified to the point where customers can keep pace with us so they get the most value out of that consistent cloud story we talked about earlier.
Yeah, no, very, very cool. Way back in the day, back in the Bill Gates days, it was the Microsoft goal was a computer in every home. It's now become a cloud in every data center or garage. So it's very, very cool. So guys, we always ask, obviously people, we'll have links in the show notes to how to go get to the software and the previews. If people want to reach out to you, or where will they see your team out and about at events this year? What's the best way for people to kind of engage if they've got follow-up questions or just want to kind of get involved with the program a little more?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Well, yeah, I mean, Corey wanted to jump in and, offer his personal email and everything.
So I was going to get my Twitter account.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I would say, first of all, check out the product, and that simple is going to azure.com, where you can, get a trial subscription for public Azure, and you can download the bits for Azure Stack and get rolling.
Yeah.
I think from a conference perspective, we've got, 2 big conferences coming up in terms of a developer and, kind of IT professional perspective in both Build and Ignite. And we're going to have a lot to say about Azure and Azure Stack there. And then, I also, think about all of the ISVs in the ecosystem that want to extend our Azure story. And, of course, we'll be working with them, across Build and our partner conferences, et cetera.
So I think this is Corey. You actually can reach me on Twitter, and so it's Corey Sanders Wa. So Corey CoreySandersWA. You can go ahead and tweet me. I do have a amazingly silly weekly show on that I tweet out. It's called Tuesdays with Corey. So super clever, shameless plug. I'm not actually supposed to or allowed to be talking about it, but I did nonetheless.
I think he's trying to compete with you. Cloudcast versus Tuesdays with Corey.
I definitely am not. I'm not.
We support all forms of shameless plugging. It's no big deal.
And then conference-wise, I do actually try and get out to quite a few. I've been to a couple of the DockerCons. I'm going to try and come to the next DockerCon. We'll see. The Cloud Founder Conference as well. I'm looking at it, possibly attending. So I think there's a few that I'm looking at going to. So we'll see.
Very cool. Very cool. Aaron, you want to wrap it up? Take us home?
Yeah, absolutely. So on behalf of everyone, thank you very much for listening this week, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.